Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one, we are going to head over to South Korea once again for the first time in what feels like absolutely ages. Now, if memory serves me correctly, the last time I reviewed a South Korean beer on the channel was back in about 2019, and that was when I had just visited the country. And it was a really nice place actually. I enjoyed my time in Korea. Busan was probably my favourite actually. But when I was there, the beer scene was still quite in its infancy, to be honest. They didn't really have a cold chain network, so breweries couldn't really send their beers across the country. But from what I understand, that has now been fixed, and there's been a good number of new breweries opening up over the last wee while, from what I understand. But the beer we're going to have a look at today comes from a brewery that I had never heard of before. These guys are a relatively new addition to the Korean beer scene, and they're doing some very solid stuff from what I understand. Quite a few different styles, but the beer itself is a style I've heard they have a very good reputation with. And this beer is also part of a series that they do where they vary up the recipe a little bit, which is quite interesting. So needless to say, I'm very curious to see what this beer is going to have in store for us. Hopefully it's another good one. Hopefully it makes for an interesting review. And as always, I hope that you guys watching enjoy my take on this one as well. So yeah, for this review then, we are going to head to Seoul, the Korean capital. We're going to go to the Itaewon district to be precise, and we're going to have a look at my first beer from Chillhops Brewing Company. So this one is one of the latest members of their Hops and Thrill series. It comes in at 10% ABV, and this is a New England Hazy Imperial Triple, whatever you want to call it, IPA. But this particular version of Hops and Thrill is the one that's been done with Motueka, Eclipse and Dorado. So a little bit of New Zealand, a little bit of Australia, and a wee bit of America in there as well. And yeah, this should be quite nice. This is a very highly rated beer. I think it had north of 4 when I had a little look on Untappd earlier on. And like I said, this brewery has a very good reputation when it comes to their IPAs, but they're pretty good with all styles from what I've heard. And always cool to introduce another Korean brewery to you here on the channel too, and hopefully we can do Korean beers a little bit more regularly over the next wee while. But yeah, let's crack on with this one then and see what it's going to have in store for us. So, as always with my reviews then, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting though, just fast forward. All the usual links can be found in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that hopefully I can do in the future from Chillhops Brewing Company. This is the very first time I'm trying one of their beers, as I mentioned, but there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The support you give is massively appreciated, and remember you can go into the channel homepage and search for beer based on the geography tagging system. So just go into the homepage, use the search bar, put your home state, county, province, prefecture, whatever you like in there. If I've reviewed beers from the area that you search for, they should pop up. Otherwise, you can check out the playlist of beers from different countries. You'll find this one in the South Korean playlist with a few other things that I reviewed a few years ago. Hopefully we can add more to that going forward, but you can also check out the playlist of beers from different countries in there as well. But yeah, let's go on then and have a little look at my brewery notes, and I'll tell you a wee bit about Chillhops Brewing Company before we taste the beer. So, Chillhops Brewing, as I've mentioned to you already, are based in Seoul in South Korea, and the company was founded back in 2017 by husband and wife team Nick Lennon and Gina Lim. So Nick has roots in Tauranga in New Zealand, but he grew up in Brisbane in Australia after his parents moved there. But he studied science and he was interested in beer owing to the very rich craft beer scene both in Australia and in New Zealand, and so naturally he ended up experimenting a little bit with home brewing. But Nick and Gina really wanted to return to Korea, and they both had the dream of starting their own craft brewery together. So they settled on Seosan in Chungcheongnam province, which is to the southwest of Seoul, as the home, mainly because they wanted to start a brewery and establish the brand, but they didn't really have the capital to employ people or start it in one of the bigger cities. But this went very well for them, I have to say. They opened their brewery in a brick house in a residential street, and soon after this they opened up a tasting room with about 20 seats and 16 beers on tap. And with these two in the company, Nick is the head brewer and Gina works as the brewery designer. But in September of 2022, they closed the tap room in Seosan and moved to a new tap room and brewery in the Itaewon district of Seoul, which is quite close to Noksapyeong train station. I do apologise if any of these Korean pronunciations are not great, but these guys have been continuing to experiment over the years, brewing lots of different styles, getting their beers out there a little bit more, and as of April 2023, when I'm filming this review, review for you. These guys have produced 128 different kinds of beer, according to Untappd. But yeah, that is everything I can really tell you about Chillhops Brewing Company for the moment. If you want to learn more about these guys, you can check out the brewery website, you can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on, and you can check out the Untappd page to learn a little bit more about all the different beers that these guys have done. So yeah, let's leave it at that for the history section and go on and have a wee look at the beer itself. So this can was one that I purchased at HK Brewcraft in Central in Hong Kong, and the main reason I got this one was because it was one, well, it was South Korean, two, it was from a brewery that I hadn't had anything from before, and three, it was very highly rated. But definitely cool to find some Korean brews in Hong Kong when I was there. But yeah, Chillhops Brewing Company, hops and thrill. Like I said earlier, this is a series of beers that they do. They tend to just change the hop bill and tweak the recipe a little bit to suit that, from what I understand. But this is a half-litre can. I honestly couldn't tell you how much this beer cost me. I really cannot remember how many Hong Kong dollars it was. But yeah, I think it was somewhere in the region of like 9-10 euros, something like that. Craft beer in Asia is a little bit more expensive, mainly because most of the ingredients have to be imported. But yeah, 10% New England triple IPA, this one. Motueka from New Zealand, 8% alpha acid, lovely kind of oily limey character. Dorado from the US, about 14% alpha acid. It tends to give you a little bit of an oily passion fruit, but quite a big juicy mango and pineapple note from what I understand. And Eclipse is a hop that I've only come across once or twice, so I took a few notes on this one. Eclipse apparently was released back in 2004. It gives you about 16% alpha acid and mandarin-y orange flavours and pine needles apparently. So yeah, this should be quite nice. But there you can see nice artwork on the can, and pretty much all the beers in the Hops and Thrill series will have artwork similar to this. But yeah, let's get this guy out, get on with the tasting and see what we have. And there you can see the kiwi and the koala on the back of this one. That's you know, that's Liam being or Nick being quite proud of his heritage, which you can't really blame him for. So Australia and New Zealand are very nice countries in my experience. I do need to get back to New Zealand and explore the beer scene there a little bit more. Going back to Australia and seeing all the new breweries would be pretty cool too. But yeah, let's get this guy out and we'll have a little look at it and see what it's all about. Yeah. Few breweries I remember from South Korea though. It was Wild Wave and Gorilla, both from Busan, and then there was also Mr. Lee in Seoul, who were very good when it came to New England hazies. They had a really nice brewery, brew pub type thing that was in the base of this really modern building. But yeah, Koreans, lovely people in my experience. We had a really good time. I think we were there for 2 weeks. We did Jeju, Busan and Seoul, so definitely need to go back and explore a little bit more. So we'll see about doing that at some point in the next couple of years. But yeah, anyway, you can see this beer is poured pretty much as you would expect from a New England IPA, especially a triple at that. So when the beer poured, you can see it came out with about a quarter finger of a frothy, I would have said perfect white head, but that head has kind of faded away to be a little bit of a foamy thin layer at the moment. You can see I've managed to get a wee bit of it back there. I think it's fair to describe it though as a perfect white rather than being creamy, but it has faded away in the middle to just be thin foamy layer, and there's a bit of a ring around the edge of the glass. But yeah, one or two big bubbles sticking toward the side of the glass for this one at the bottom, a few little ones creeping up toward the surface there, but yeah, not too much in the way of visible carbonation. Colour wise though, this beer looks pretty nice, lovely kind of rich yellow with a very slight amber tint to it. Now remember, the colour of your beer depends on a few different things. One, the type of malts that you use. This goes a long way to determining your EBC rating. Two, length of your wort boil is also going to play a role, because the longer you boil the wort, the more the sugars caramelise, and thus you get a darker colour of beer. But any barrel aging you do or adjuncts you put in will affect the colour of your beer as well, but quite often you don't have to care about that when it comes to IPAs of any description. Only really fruit IPAs would break that rule. But yeah, the level of haze in this one is pretty impressive. It's quite a soupy, gloopy leaning one, but to be honest, you would kind of expect that when it's a 10% triple IPA. The level of haze in these beers, of course, depends on the oak content, the wheat content, and to a degree what yeast you use, and it can vary from brewery to brewery, recipe to recipe. It just depends. But yeah, very nice looking beer, this one, I have to say. Nothing particularly surprising about its appearance when you consider what style it is. So let's have a wee look at the nose and see what this one is all about. Oh yeah, I'm going to say straight away, that smells very nice and it is in good condition. From what I understand, the guys at HK Brewcraft were saying that these beers were very, very fresh, actually, the ones that they got in from Korea. So we are getting a fairly fresh look at some of these Korean beers. I think it was just a week before I arrived in Hong Kong, and I've had this beer in the fridge maybe 2 or 3 weeks now, actually. But yeah, still in very, very good condition in that case. But yeah, first impression of this one is it's a lovely big kind of oaty leaning creamy New England IPA, lots of kind of juicy fruits in there, and you've got a more kind of grassy sort of green component to this one. But let's try and break that aroma down and just describe it for you a wee bit more in depth. But one thing I would say about New England IPAs is that for me there are 6 elements to the flavour. You've got the kind of farmhousey and yeasty character, the rye leaning grainy side of things as well. Those 2 elements tend to be a bit more prominent in American brewed IPAs in my experience. New England IPAs, I should say. But yeah, you've also got the hoppy bite, the wheaty bitiness, the barley malt bread, the oaty creaminess, and the sweeter side of things. These are the 6 elements of flavour I always look for in a New England IPA. But with this one, to me on the aroma, it really leans toward the oaty side of things. And with oats, you can usually use that as a kind of indicator of how to tell you how fresh the beer is going to be. The creamier the oat smell, the fresher it is. The drier the smell, the older the beer is, the longer it's been sitting. And you can get a little touch of dryness out of this one, but mainly it's kind of big and creamy in that sense. But yeah, the backbone of the beer for me, the backbone of the malty side of things would be a little bit of a kind of fresh, white bready bread crust. That just holds everything together. There's a little tiny touch of woodiness in there and a wee bit of a crackery character, but I'm getting a lot of kind of doughy white bread out of this one for sure. And when it's a big 10% thing, you would kind of expect that, to be honest. You would expect it to be a big heavy malty presence. So yeah, good little bit of white fluffy bread in there for me. You can smell a wee bit of the wheat as well, and the wheat is quite interesting because I do get a little touch of the bitiness that you normally get from the wheat at the back of the nose, but you can just smell that the wheat is, generally speaking, quite smooth, and it just is densifying the whole beer, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. But yeah, I certainly do like how all of that goes together in this one. So yeah, lovely smooth kind of wheaty character in there, but a little bit of bitiness in the back of the nose. You've got lovely oaty kind of creamy notes in there, and yeah, the way this beer goes together, I think, is very, very nice. So it gets a big thumbs up from me in that sense. So lovely creamy oats in there, and there is a degree of sweetness to this one as well, which, like I say, you would expect when it's a 10% triple IPA. So I'm getting a little bit of this kind of Werther's Original butter candy, butterscotchy type thing out of this one. There's maybe a tiny little hint of biscuit in there, but in honesty, this IPA really reminds me of some of the more old school ones that I had in Sweden when the first New England IPAs really arrived back in about 2015, 2016 kind of time. So yeah, the way this beer goes together in that sense, I think, is really very, very nice. So yeah, big oaty creamy sort of thing, a lot of bready character there too, and a good bit of sweetness, so you can't knock it for that. So yeah, in terms of the green component then, I think we've said everything we need to about the malty and yeasty side of the beer actually for the aroma. But yeah, there is a little touch of earthiness in there for me, and maybe a wee bit of herbal character, but the green component in this one for me really leans more toward a kind of brighter floral aromaticity and also a little bit of a wet grassiness. Now, as I've told you in many videos before as well, when it comes to IPAs, you have 3 different kinds of hopping. So assuming you have, for example, a 90-minute wort boil, which is quite common in IPAs, within the first hour of the wort boil, you do early addition hopping, which gives you mostly bitterness, but you maybe get a little bit of flavour and aroma out of it as well. But yeah, mostly bitterness in the early addition hopping. Late addition hopping, which comes in the last half hour of the wort boil, that gives you a little bit of bitterness but mainly flavour and aroma. And dry hopping after the wort boil is complete gives you all flavour and aroma. Now, New England IPAs tend to rely on late addition hopping and dry hopping, whereas West Coast IPAs use all 3. Now, dry hopping and late addition hopping are going to give you a more bright green component in the aroma, whereas early addition hopping is going to dominate and give you the deeper, danker notes. So yeah, for me this one really is, you can kind of tell that it's relying more on late addition and dry hopping actually. So yeah, I like that about it. But for me there's quite a bright floral aromaticity to this one, and all three of the hops in this beer could give you a little bit of that. You can get a little bit of the more kind of piney notes from the Eclipse in there too. I'm really not sure if it's a 33-33-33 ratio that they've used the hops on in this one, but I would assume that it is. But yeah, the green component for me, you get a good little bit of grassy, zesty character out of this one, which I think is most likely to be the Motueka, because it's got that limey, zesty note. But the fruits are kind of as you would expect, to be honest with you, if you know these hops. But it's well balanced in that sense too. So yeah, I get quite a bit of an oily lime out of this one, and that's going to be the Motueka. I get a little bit of gooseberry within that as well, in fairness though, which I don't think I would associate naturally with any of these hops. But yeah, for me, a little bit of oily gooseberry in there, a wee bit of a kind of limey character as well, and you also have a nice little bit of tropical fruit in there. So for me, good, strong passion fruit, which I think, yeah, that's going to be the El Dorado that's giving you that. There's lots and lots of juicy mango as well. And then, yeah, wee bits of apricot and pineapple and stuff, for sure. But, yeah, the Eclipse, for me, it's supposed to give you a little bit of an orange, like a kind of mandarin-y orange. And you get a little bit of this almost like peachy type orange out of this one, I would say. And you can smell that just on top of the oily, kind of limey character as well. But the way everything goes together in this beer, I think, is really very nice. As I say, it comes across as a very smooth, creamy, and juicy New England IPA. But it gets a big, big thumbs up from me. I think this one goes together really, really nicely. And if this is a kind of benchmark of any of the beers that Chillhops do, I think we're in for a treat if we try a few more of them. But yeah, as I always say, take a wee bit of time to enjoy the aroma of the beer before you get stuck into it. I think it is about time for us to have a taste of this one. So this is the Hops and Thrill Motueka Eclipse El Dorado edition, released in early 2023, if I'm not mistaken. A New England Triple IPA, my first beer from Chillhops Brewing Company in Itaewon in Seoul in South Korea. Let's get stuck in. Slange, Skål, cheers, Gambe. Oh yeah, I'm going to say straight away, that is very, very nice. And I'm going to also say that it's dangerously drinkable for a 10% New England Triple. Yeah, this is a very, very nice drinking beer, I have to say. It covers its alcohol dangerously well. So if you try this one for yourself, be careful with it, because it goes down like a... you can tell it's a little bit boozier in fairness with how strong the flavour is, but the drinkability of this thing is up there with some of the really nice kind of old school West Coast pale ales and things like that. So yeah, big thumbs up to Chillhops Brewing for this. I guess we'll need to have a look at something a little bit darker and stronger and stuff to see how they do the dark side of things too, and maybe a lighter lager. But yeah, the New England Triple IPAs, I guess, are pretty damn solid if this is anything to go by. But yeah, I will say as well that my impression of what the flavour was going to be from the aroma is pretty accurate with this one too. It's a big, creamy, oaty New England IPA, lots of juicy fruits in there, and you've got a lovely kind of more floral leaning green component, but a bit of piney resin as well. We'll come back to that later though. Let's break the beer down though and just describe the flavour a wee bit more in depth, as we always do. Yeah, so middle third of your palate then. The backbone of this beer, you've got a lovely kind of soft white bready bread crust in there. You do get a little touch of dryness out of it the further into the aftertaste you go, but then the further forward you go as well, you get a little touch of woodiness coming out of this beer. The one thing that I was getting out of this beer in the aroma, but not so much in the flavour, was a little touch of crackery note, and in fairness you do get a little bit of it the further into the aftertaste you go. But yeah, for me, smooth white bread crust, little touch of woodiness further forward on that middle third of the palate, teeny little bit of cracker above that, but then you start to get the lovely kind of fluffy white bready notes out of this one. The bready character in this beer is actually quite dense. I would love to know what type of malts they're using in this one, if they have you know, Korean malts or something like that. But yeah, the bready character in this beer for me is quite wet and quite dense. But then, as I said, it is a triple IPA. This one, it's not a single or a double. But yeah, it is pretty damn nice. So yeah, a lovely dense white bready character sitting on top of that. Maybe a little touch of a kind of brown bready sweetness as well. But then you can feel the wheaty layer sitting above that, and the wheat in this beer really is quite smoothening, to be honest with you. Sometimes wheat can be quite zippy and quite bitey, but for me the wheaty layer in this beer really acts more as a kind of smoothening agent rather than anything else. So yeah, for me, above the wheaty layer, you start to get the oaty notes coming out of the beer as well, and the oats are lovely in this beer. So when you go down the middle line of your tongue, you can feel the oats at their creamiest and most dense in that sense, and the oats have a little bit of sweetness to them, and as you move out toward the edges of the palate there, you can feel the creaminess of the oats stays there for quite a wee while. Then you just get a little bit of that dryness from them just as you reach the very extremities of the middle third of your palate. So yeah, lovely oaty creamy notes in this beer, I have to say. Above the oaty character, you can feel there's a little bit of a sweetness there. So in the dead centre of your palate, you can feel there's a little bit of a circle. That's where you get this kind of Werther's Original butter candy, butterscotchy kind of thing coming out of the beer. So yeah, definitely a wee bit of that there, and potentially just a little bit of biscuit above that. But for me, the dominant factor, or the dominant flavour, I should say, brain is not working at this time of night, but the dominant flavour in the malty side of this beer is the oat, and the dominant component, I would say, is a lovely creamy oaty notes, and they just go together really, really well actually. So yeah, I like that about this one. So the border region between middle and back third of your palate, you get a nice little bit of bready build up in there with this one. So I do like how that goes there, a lovely little bit of bready build up. And it's kind of white bread, but you do get a wee bit more of a sweeter brown bread to it as well. The layers in the back third of the palate are quite similar, I have to say. So you get a wee bit more bread crust there, and you can feel it is a little bit drier and a wee bit more grainy. As I've always said, more bitter and dry flavours come out further back on the palate. But yeah, you can feel with this one that the sweeter flavours come out further forward, I should say, as well. But you can feel the bread crust is a little bit more grainy and dry. You can feel a wee bit more of the crackery layer there, but then you've got the white bready notes. Well, actually, I would say there's a bit of a brown bready layer in that back third of the palate, but you can feel a nice, little bit taller and a wee bit more airy brown bready character. Then above that, you've got the more airy white bready notes as well, which I can certainly appreciate. So the way that that goes together is very, very nice. So yeah, for me, the airiness of the bread on the back third of the palate is really quite nice. Above all of that though, you can feel the wheat sitting on top of it. It gives you a little bit of bitiness in that sense, and still it's quite smooth, but above all of that, there is a wee bit of a more, there is a wee bit more of a kind of yeasty, yeah, there is a little bit of that more kind of yeasty, kind of farmhousey type note coming out of the beer as well. So yeah, for me, the way that that goes together is really quite nice. You get that, it's got this more farmhousey, brown, white bready mix, and a little bit of woody and kind of you know, grainy character in there too. But definitely back third of the palate, You can feel the flavour is taller, then as you come further forward into the middle third of the palate, it just condenses down and squashes together that little bit more. But that goes together really nicely. I think it's a big thumbs up from me. Yeah, so I think that covers the malty and yeasty side of the beer. Let's look at the hoppy side of things. Back corners of the palate, there's a nice little bit of earthiness in there. As you move further forward, you can feel there's a wee touch of herbal character, but quite early, but quite soon you get a lot of pine resin coming out of this one. There is a good little bit of that pine needly quality, which will be the Eclipse in this one, I would say, because the other two hops, the Motueka and the Dorado, in my experience, are not such big and pine resiny. They more have this kind of slightly, not too spicy, but quite a little bit spicy is probably the way to put it, a little bit of a spicy floral aromaticity to them. So yeah, I think the pine needly note that's quite prevalent in this green component of this beer is most likely from the Eclipse. But round the front curve of the tongue, it's a bit lighter and more grassy, and you do have a wee bit of zestiness to this one as well on that front curve of your tongue. But let's just get the rest of this into the glass and we can enjoy it. I mean, this beer, like I say, it is very, very easy to drink for a 10%er. But yeah, I think we've covered the green component on this one. Let's look at the front third of your palate and the fruity side of things then. So the border region between front third and middle third of your palate, you get a little bit of a more you get a mix of white and brown bread on this one, where it just builds up in there. The base of that front third of your palate, there's a little touch of bread crust there, but it's mainly a smooth and slightly more dense white bread there, and you can feel that nice oily bubble sitting above it where the juicy fruity esters just roll their way out of the beer. So yeah, the way that the juicy fruity esters in this beer go together are very, very nice. For me, at the back of that front third of your palate, you have a wee bit of a more, there's a little touch of grapefruit to this one, which is quite interesting. So I'm certainly getting a wee bit of that, and I do wonder if that comes from the Dorado. But yeah, there's a little touch of grapefruit there, and then as you move further forward, quite a pungent passion fruit, and then as you keep moving forward, you get a little bit more of a kind of quite ripe and juicy mango. In the very dead centre of that front third of your palate, you get a little bit of an apricot-y, dry apricot-y note, and some pineapple-y notes above that. So yeah, the way it goes together is really, really nice. Beyond that, into the front half of the front third of your palate, you start to get the Motueka and the Eclipse showing their properties a little bit more. So for me, the Motueka kind of sits in the base of that front sixth, the front half of the front third of your palate. You can feel that sort of limey character there, and the limey notes actually, you can feel them mixing in with that kind of zesty grassiness on the front tip of your tongue. But the further into the aftertaste you go with it, you start to get that more oily, orangey, mandarin note from the Eclipse in this one as well. So yeah, there's actually quite a good balance between the pungent passion fruit in there and the quite zesty lime and the mandarin-y oranges in this beer. I really do like how this beer goes together in that particular sense. The fruity side of it is quite nice, and it does get more kind of citrusy, both on the grapefruity and limey side of things, the further into the aftertaste you go. But as I say, overall, a really, really nice, solid New England triple IPA. You cannot knock this one at all. And if this is any, if this beer is anything to go by, it kind of seems that Chillhops are a pretty damn solid brewery, needless to say. So yeah, I think we can leave it at that for describing the flavour. Let's just round off this review with a wee look at the mouthfeel then. So yeah, for me, the mouthfeel of this beer, it's got a lovely kind of creamy body to it, this one. It is quite creamy, but at the same time it does have a little bit of oiliness to it. I would describe this one as being at the top end of mid-bodied, maybe bottom end of full-bodied, smooth carbonation. It is pretty nice. In terms of the IBUs, I'm tempted to say this one is about 50. I get quite a bit of pine resin-y character out of this beer the further into the aftertaste that we go. So I do want to say this beer has a little bit more IBU to it. 50 IBUs to me would seem a kind of reasonable guess. But yeah, you would expect that as well. New England IPAs are usually about about 30 IBUs, but the double tends to be about 40, the triple tends to be about 50. You've got to balance these things out, of course. But yeah, for me, probably about 50 IBUs. The malt base has a little bit of dryness to it, a little bit of smoothness, and quite a bit of creamy sweetness as well. Mainly a kind of oaty sweetness, not too much in terms of like a kind of brown sugary type quality. But then you've got a lovely fruity character with this one, a little bit oily, and a mix between kind of stronger, you know, a bit more pungent tropical fruits and the more zesty lime and orangey characters in there. But all three hops, quite obviously, playing a role in this one. But a lovely, lovely beer, and a very good introduction to Chillhops Brewing, I have to say. So yeah, I think we can leave it at that for this one. So this was the Hops and Thrill, a New England Triple IPA, 10% ABV. We should also say this is the Motueka, Eclipse and El Dorado edition from Chillhops Brewing, originally from Seoul in Chungcheongnam County, if I've got that right, but now based in Itaewon in Itaewon in Seoul in South Korea. My first South Korean beer review for you in quite some time, but hopefully a few more to come over the next little while. But safe to say, I think we can leave it at that for this review. Once again, thank you for watching my beer reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comment section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Chillhops Brewing Company as well. And we will no doubt return to these guys again at some point very, very soon. But until then, Slàinte, Skål, cheers, Gambi. Thank you for watching. Check out my social media, check out Chillhops social media, and do let me know some other South Korean breweries that you guys would recommend I check out if I haven't done so already. Until then, Slàinte, Skål, cheers, see you guys in the next review.